hope you like this. If you do, give it a thumbs up and leave any comments below. And remember to subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date on all my hypnotic bedtime stories. So I hope you enjoy the story.
So as you relax and listen to me and begin to drift comfortably asleep, I don't know whether you'll find yourself drifting comfortably asleep faster to the sound of my voice, to the words I use, or whether it'll be to the spaces between my words, and as you comfortably fall asleep, I'm just going to tell a story in the background. And you can have a sense of rowing down a river, of comfortably rowing along, pushing the water back with the oars on one side of the boat, and then the other, and then the other, and then the other, while relaxing back and looking around, seeing the trees on the banks, hearing the sound of the water as the oars push through that water. And then after some time of rowing down the river, you can have a sense of rowing up to the shore, exiting that boat, and starting to walk along the shore. And as you walk, so you can notice sounds around you. The rustling leaves of the trees, the sounds of birds and the breeze, the feeling of the sun on your face, sounds of each footstep you take. As you walk in search of a small little den, and you're searching for a tiny entrance to this den, trying to notice something somewhere. And after a while of searching, you find a small entrance that's almost buried as if it's part of a tree. And you walk through that entrance, and as you do, you find yourself in a long corridor. And you start walking down that long corridor, noticing the sounds behind you fading away as the sound of your footsteps echoes down the corridor. And you continue walking down that corridor. And at the end of the corridor is a door. And on the door is a combination lock. And you don't know what the combination is, so you close your eyes. You push on the first reel, on the first ring of numbers. And while you're pushing, you slide those numbers down just gently. And you do so with your eyes closed and all of your attention focused on sounds from the lock, on the feelings coming through your fingertips. And you hear and feel when the first number is reached. And then you move on to the second number and you push on that ring of numbers. And you start sliding that ring of numbers around, listening closely, feeling for sensations from the lock, until you notice that number. And then you do the same with the third one, the fourth one, and the fifth one. And then the lock pops open, and you take the lock off the door. And with a creak and a scrape, you slide that door open and walk into the room. And in the centre of this room, you see a large crystal ball. You walk over to that crystal ball. You rub your hands together. You gently rest your hands on the sides of the crystal ball. And you gaze into that crystal ball. And as you gaze into it, so shapes and colours seem to dance and move the longer you gaze into it. And while you gaze into it, you start noticing that that movement becomes a person, as if there's a person somewhere else looking into another crystal ball. And you realise it's the messenger you've been looking for. And this messenger communicates a message to you. They tell you need to seek out the wizard. And that this wizard is going to share some knowledge with you. That's going to be very important. It's going to teach you about some connection. They don't give you many clues. All they do is say to follow the bubbles. And then what looks like a puff of smoke inside that crystal ball makes the image disappear and fade away. And you find yourself just in that room, in silence. And over in the corner of the room, you start to hear a popping sound, and you see that there are some bubbles rising up by the wall. And you head over to that wall. And as you arrive at the wall, so you notice there's a breeze coming through a small hole in the wall. And you feel around the wall and find a secret door handle that makes that wall turn around, opening a passage. You walk through that passage, and you follow that passage out to some woodland. And you don't quite know where you've come out, where this woodland is. But you start exploring. You start paying very close attention to any clue that lets you know how to find a path through these woods. And you look for anywhere that looks slightly more trodden. And you carefully and slowly find your way through the woods. in search of this wizard. And as you search through the woods, so the sun begins to set. And so you set up a hammock for the night in a tree and relax down in the hammock and drift comfortably asleep. And then in the morning you take down the hammock and carry on your journey, searching for that wizard. And for a day and a night, and a day and a night, you search for that wizard. And then during a day, you see this weird, narrow, tall tower sticking out of the woods. And on the top of this narrow, tall, slightly bent and curved, almost erratic-looking tower, you see what looks like a living space at the top. And so you find your way to the bottom of the tower, and you search around for a way in. And you see a doorway. And you walk into that doorway, but when you've walked inside, you notice there's no ladders up, there's no steps up. There seems to be no way of going up. And yet you can see high up into the tower. And you can see that it does look like there's a living space at the top. And you call up to the wizard, but don't get a reply. And you think, how are you going to get up to the top? And you call up to the wizard again, and you don't get a reply. Then you decide the wizard must have to come down at some point. So you'll just sit down here and wait. And you cross your legs and sit on the floor and close your eyes and start allowing yourself to comfortably drift into a meditation. And while you sit there comfortably drifting in a meditation, you start thinking about just follow the bubbles, and about the bubbles that you saw. And you start having thoughts of bubbles. And while you think about the bubbles, so you start to feel a certain tingling feeling and a certain lightness. And you just relax and go with the experience. And while you're relaxing and going with the experience, you notice that tingling, that lightness seems to surround your whole body. And then after what seemed quite a long time to meditate, you comfortably open your eyes, wondering whether the wizard has decided yet to come down to see you, or arrived back to see you if they weren't up there already. You open your eyes and you find yourself sat on a rug in front of a log fire in a stone fireplace. And you stand up and look around you, and can see through the small square windows, and you realise you're up at the top of the tower and you've no idea how you got here. And you wonder whether there was a connection between meditating on the bubbles, the feelings you felt, and now being at the top of the tower. And you see the wizard sat on a chair. And the wizard tells you that they need to teach you a lesson. They need to teach you something that will help you to connect. That there's a planet that you need to project yourself to. And you need to connect with that planet for the safety and the survival of the planet. And you don't really understand. But they explain that everything has been building up to this. Touching the crystal ball, following the bubbles, and now learning from the wizard. And the wizard puts on a purple robe, walks over and holds his hands out, and he gazes between his hands. And you look wondering and waiting to know what's going to happen next. And he seems to have become motionless. And so you wonder what's going on, and you gaze between your hands, thinking, what is it about this weird gazing? And so you gaze between your hands, and then you become motionless. And then your two minds connect and become one for a while. Almost falling into harmony with each other, almost like dancing. And almost telepathically, the wizard communicates the idea of having a sense of that planet, and you'll go there. And you wonder, are you going to have to think of bubbles again? And as you think of bubbles, so in a bubble, you start drifting away from where you are. You drift through the roof of the house, and you realise, as you're drifting through the roof of the house, that you can see yourself and that wizard just there in that house, motionless, and yet you feel like you're drifting through the roof of the house, and you keep drifting higher and higher, further and further, faster and faster. Until you can see stars flashing by. You can see the planet leave behind you. And then after a while you see a star getting brighter and nearer and brighter. And then you see a planet that's orbiting that star. And you arrive at that planet. And as you land on the planet, you notice there are people here, a different race, an alien race, but still, there are beings here. And these people seem to be able to communicate with you, and you seem to be able to communicate with them. And they can see you, and you can see them. And you don't know what it is that you needed to come here for. And then you notice, you see that there's a worried look on their faces. And they explain that the star is about to let out an explosion that will destroy the planet, that will send radiation across the planet, so it'll just be a ball of rock floating in the sky. And you realise what it is you have to do. And so you sit down on the ground, you cross your legs, you rub your hands together, you hold your hands loosely apart, you gaze between your hands and wait. And as you wait, so you notice a ball of energy building and growing and forming